Today I'd like to continue our journey through the Gospel of Matthew and take a look at chapter 5. Chapter 5 is really the heart in many ways of the Gospel of Matthew because it features the Sermon on the Mount. And it's going to give a sense of really the teachings of Jesus and what he wanted to share, not only with the apostles and the disciples, but to share with the crowd who were following Jesus, and also, of course, very importantly, to share with you and me. It is addressed to the crowds, so there's a multitude there, which is a contrast to the Gospel of Luke, where Luke has it addressed just to the disciples. It's up on a mountain, which reminds everyone, of course, of Moses going up to the mountain. So the people would have been aware of the background here. And they would have sensed what Jesus was about. As he goes up the mountain, he's imitating, of course, the great teacher, the great prophet, the great leader of the Jewish people, Moses, who led the people to freedom. So Jesus, now teaching from the mountain, is going to lead the people to a spiritual freedom. Jesus, in giving this sermon, sits down. So he's not standing up, he's sitting down. And sitting down would have been a position that was typical both of teachers and of kings. So Jesus, in a way, is combining both in terms of his posture, in terms of sitting down. Yes, he is a teacher. He's addressing the crowds as a teacher. He's teaching them about the kingdom of God, what the kingdom is like. But he also is a king, a spiritual king. The people were looking for more of a physical king. Jesus is showing them a different type of kingship. His disciples come to him. Very interesting here that they are drawn to Jesus. So all of these disciples that are following him, Jesus is sitting on the mountain, and they come to him. And then he says, blessed are this greeting that he gives, this introduction to his sermon. Blessed are the blessed he's talking about. And blessed are is a greeting that's also found in the Hebrew Scriptures. It's found in the wisdom literature. It's also found in the Psalms. We see it in the book of Proverbs, in the book of Sirach. We see it in the book of the prophet Isaiah. So it was a address, a way of speaking, a way of not only greeting, but a way of instructing, in a sense of bringing people into a more intimate relationship with their God. So this was something that the people would have been familiar with from their own scriptures. And again, it shows the continuity of Jesus in terms of the Hebrew scriptures and now his own teaching. Jesus is Jewish. He's speaking as a Jewish teacher to the crowd that is gathered, and they, of course, are primarily Jewish themselves. Four of the Beatitudes have parallels in Luke, the 1st, 2nd, 4th, and 9th. So Luke also has some of this teaching, but not to the same extent as Matthew does. Blessed are the poor in spirit, Jesus says. The poor in the Hebrew scriptures are those who are without material possessions and who put their trust in God. So the idea was that it wasn't so much important or significant in the eyes of God what you had materially. But what was more important, what made you really poor in the sense that you could receive the teaching of God, was your faithfulness to God, your sense of making God a priority in your life. So to be poor in spirit is to put God first. And of course, a great instruction for us. We can get very caught up in the materialism of our society. We can desire to have more goods, better cars, better homes, more luxury. But really, is this what life is all about? Jesus is saying. If you truly want to be blessed, it's important to be poor in spirit. So what Jesus was speaking about here was something that was familiar, again, to his audience, this Hebrew concept of the poor in spirit. Their trust primarily is in God and not in the material things. We see this in the book of Isaiah, we see it in the book of the prophet Zephaniah, and the term that is used is a very significant term for the prophets, and Jesus is echoing it here, certainly in his teaching, is the Anawim. And the Anawim were those who were lowly in the eyes of the world. They weren't significant, they weren't rulers, they weren't leaders. They were just simple, humble people, poor people, trying to make ends meet. But they were not only lowly in that sense, but also very humble people. Humble in the sense that they knew who they were and they knew who God was. And they trusted tremendously in God. They knew that their life depended on God. They knew that creation was a gift from God. They knew that everything they got was from God. So the Anawim become open to seeing God in their everyday situations in their lives. They knew what was important. They were humble in that sense. Humble in terms of acknowledging who they were, acknowledging who their God was, and trying to help their neighbors as best as they could. The word patokos, the Greek word, denotes really in one of the meanings a beggar, one who is destitute, one who has absolutely nothing. And so a beggar is somebody who is looking to God and to others for her or his very sustenance, for their next meal. They're begging. They need our help. They are lowly. They are destitute. They are empty. And so they can be filled by God. So in this first beatitude, Jesus is saying they are blessed, which we look at it and say, well, what is the blessing in being poor? What is the blessing in being a destitute? What is the blessing in being a beggar? The blessing is that we can reach out to others, that in our emptiness we can let them fill us and God fill us. We can be open in trust to our God. So Jesus is encouraging us to build community through trust, through care for one another, to care for those who are the beggars and the destitute, and also to realize that it is important to put our trust totally and completely in God. So blessed are the poor in spirit, for that kingdom of God, that kingdom where God accepts us and loves us, that kingdom of God will be theirs.